They laughed when a CEO married a poor black woman, but none of them knew the storm that was coming. The camera closes in on a young wife standing beside the world's most powerful man, while a room full of elites snicker behind their champagne glasses. They think she's nothing, just a mechanic from a forgotten neighborhood. But when strange numbers start to appear and entire fortunes begin to vanish, she sees danger that no one else can. Hidden hands inside the company are stealing billions, and the same people who mocked her are now trapping her, smearing her, trying to destroy her life before she can expose the truth. But what happens when the woman they laughed at becomes the only one who can save everything, and when the truth finally explodes? Who will be the one begging for mercy? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The gleaming glass towers of downtown Chicago reflected the crisp autumn morning as Gabriel Grant straightened his silk tie, striding out of the boardroom where he'd just closed $1 billion merger. His polished Oxford shoes clicked against the marble floors of Grant Enterprises headquarters, but his mind was already elsewhere, focused on a much more personal merger about to take place across town. 20 minutes later, his sleek black town car pulled up to the modest Cook County courthouse. Gabriel's heart quickened as he spotted her waiting on the steps, Michaela Brooks, radiant in a simple cream-colored dress, her dark curls framing a face that held more beauty and wisdom than all the corporate portraits lining his company's halls. "You look stunning," he whispered, taking her hands in his. Michaela's warm brown eyes met his, a mix of joy and nervous energy dancing in them. "You clean up pretty nice yourself, Mr. CEO." She teased back, smoothing his lapel with practiced hands more accustomed to fixing engines than adjusting designer suits. Pastor Helena Brooks, who had watched Michaela grow from a curious child into the determined woman before her, stood nearby with misty eyes. A small group of Michaela's friends from her Detroit neighborhood, fellow mechanics and community members who'd become family, gathered close, their presence a reminder of the genuine world she came from. Inside the courthouse, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting gentle shadows across the worn wooden floors. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their voices steady as they exchanged vows. When Gabriel slipped the simple gold band onto Michaela's finger, his usual corporate confidence gave way to tender vulnerability. "I, Gabriel, take you, Michaela, to be my wife," he said, his voice catching slightly. "To have and to hold, from this day forward." Michaela's response came clear and true, her fingers warm against his as she placed his ring. Pastor Helena's rich voice carried through the chamber as she pronounced them husband and wife. And Gabriel's kiss was soft but certain, a promise sealed before God and their chosen family. Afterward, they gathered at May's Diner, a cozy spot where the vinyl booths had seen decades of life's moments, big and small. Over plates of home-style meatloaf and mashed potatoes, laughter flowed freely. Gabriel watched in quiet amazement as Michaela shared stories with her friends, her face animated and natural in a way that made his heart swell. "Remember when you first fixed his Mustang?" asked Tony, one of her fellow mechanics, grinning. "Who knew a broken fuel pump could lead to all this?" Michaela laughed, squeezing Gabriel's hand under the table. "Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected breakdowns." Pastor Helena raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To unexpected blessings, and to love that bridges all divides." The afternoon sun was dipping toward the horizon when they finally headed to Gabriel's penthouse. As the private elevator climbed past the 80th floor, Michaela's eyes widened at the sprawling city view. The doors opened directly into a vast living space where floor-to-ceiling windows framed Lake Michigan like a painting. "This is something else," Michaela breathed, taking in the minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her entire garage back home. She ran her fingers along a sleek marble counter, feeling suddenly out of place. Gabriel noticed her hesitation. "It's just a space," he said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You're what makes it home." Before Michaela could respond, Gabriel's phone erupted with notifications. His face tightened as he scanned the screen. Headlines were already spreading across social media. Grant Enterprises CEO in shock marriage to unknown mechanic, and billionaire weds working-class woman. Company stocks tumble. The phone rang. Harrison Wells, his board chairman. Gabriel silenced it, but more calls followed. His email inbox filled with urgent messages demanding an emergency board meeting. Online comments scrolled past, each one sharper than the last. Gold digger alert. What was he thinking? There goes the company's reputation. Michaela stood quietly by the window, watching the city lights blink to life as dusk settled over Chicago. Gabriel crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly, his blue eyes intense. "What they're saying, none of it matters. This is real. We're real." She nodded, but her voice was soft with concern. "Your company can handle it," he finished. "I've weathered corporate storms before. But this?" He lifted her hand, kissing the ring he'd placed there hours before. "This is what I'm fighting for. Love like ours doesn't come along every day, and I won't let anyone tear it down." Michaela leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his certainty even as she felt the weight of the world's judgment settling around them. Through the window, camera flashes flickered from the street below, reporters already gathering, hungry for a story about the unlikely couple. The phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Pastor Helena lit up the screen. "Remember what matters. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Michaela smiled, remembering the countless times she'd heard those words in the pastor's small Detroit church. She turned to Gabriel, touching his worried brow. "Together?" she asked simply. "Together," he answered, pulling her close as the city buzzed with speculation beneath them. "Whatever storms come, we'll weather them together." His phone continued its urgent symphony, but Gabriel held Michaela closer, their hearts beating in sync as night fell over Chicago. In that moment, in spite of the growing chaos beyond their windows, they found peace in the certainty of their love, even as both sensed the gathering storm that threatened to test its strength. The evening deepened around them, transforming the glass-walled penthouse into a sanctuary of soft shadows and city lights. Though the outside world clamored for explanations and judgments, up here, in this space that would become their shared home, they held on to the pure joy of their wedding day, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them standing side by side. The morning sun had barely crept over Lake Michigan when Gabriel and Michaela stepped into Grant Enterprises' gleaming headquarters. The polished marble lobby felt cold and unwelcoming as security guards eyed them with poorly concealed curiosity. Michaela smoothed her simple navy dress, the most professional outfit she owned, and tried to ignore the stares from employees arriving for work. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent, Gabriel's hand steady on her lower back. As the doors opened to the executive suite, Michaela's heart pounded against her ribs. Through glass walls, she could see 12 board members already seated in the conference room, their faces stern and expectant. "Ready?" Gabriel asked softly. Michaela squared her shoulders. "As I'll ever be." They entered the boardroom together. Harrison Wells, the silver-haired board chairman, barely acknowledged Michaela as he gestured for them to sit. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Mr. Grant," Harrison began, His voice clipped. Perhaps you'd care to explain yesterday's impulsive decision. Our stock has already dropped 3 points. I married the woman I love, Gabriel replied evenly. My personal life shouldn't impact company operations. Victoria Chen, the CFO, cleared her throat. When you're the face of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, everything you do impacts operations. Her sharp gaze turned to Michaela. Ms. Brooks, what exactly are your qualifications? Michaela met her eyes steadily. I own Brooks Auto Repair in Detroit. I've been a certified master mechanic for 8 years. Murmurs rippled around the table. Someone actually scoffed. And your education? Pressed Richard Morton, adjusting his designer glasses. Community college, associate's degree in automotive technology. More whispers. Someone muttered, Jesus Christ, under their breath. Tell me, Ms. Brooks. Harrison leaned forward. What attracted you to Mr. Grant? Besides the obvious advantages? Gabriel's hand clenched into a fist, but Michaela touched his arm gently. Sir, I fell in love with Gabriel when he was just a man with a broken-down car who treated me with respect. I didn't know who he was until our 3rd date. How convenient, Victoria muttered. The interrogation continued for hours. They questioned every aspect of her life, her family background, her finances, her previous relationships. Michaela answered each probe with quiet dignity, though Gabriel could see the hurt in her eyes. Finally, Harrison closed his leather portfolio. The annual executive dinner is tonight. I trust you'll both attend. We wouldn't miss it, Gabriel replied, his tone carrying a warning edge. Back in Gabriel's office, Michaela sank into a chair. That was horrible, Gabriel finished, kneeling beside her. I'm so sorry, love. They had no right to treat you that way. She managed a weak smile. We knew it wouldn't be easy. She glanced at the clock. The dinner's in 6 hours. What should I expect? Gabriel spent the afternoon preparing her, explaining the complex web of relationships and power dynamics she'd face. The CEO of Palmer Tech will try to bait you into political debates. Avoid Margaret Winston. She feeds everything to the press. And watch out for James Chen, brilliant engineer, but notorious for trying to make newcomers look foolish. Michaela absorbed it all, asking careful questions as she got ready in Gabriel's private bathroom. She'd brought her best dress, a simple black cocktail number that suddenly felt woefully inadequate for such a high-profile event. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a vision of crystal chandeliers and gilt mirrors when they arrived. Conversations stuttered as they entered, then resumed in urgent whispers. Michaela held her head high, Gabriel's arm solid beneath her hand. They made their way through forced pleasantries and thinly veiled judgment. Michaela could feel the weight of countless evaluating stares, measuring everything from her modest jewelry to her shoes. The breaking point came during dinner. James Chen, Victoria's husband and the company's senior engineer, loudly discussed a persistent efficiency problem in their newest electric vehicle prototype. The power conversion ratio simply can't be optimized further, he declared, clearly enjoying his audience. Though perhaps our newest addition has some insight from her experience with oil changes. Laughter rippled around the table. Michaela set down her fork carefully. Actually, she said, her voice clear and steady, have you considered the possibility that the issue isn't in the power conversion itself, but in the thermal management system? The table fell silent. The current setup creates a feedback loop in the cooling system, she continued, grabbing a napkin and sketching quickly. If you modified the coolant flow pattern here and here, you'd eliminate the efficiency loss from heat buildup. James stared at her diagram, face reddening. Gabriel watched with quiet pride as his wife explained the solution in simple, precise terms that left no room for argument. The silence that followed was deafening. James Chen's mouth opened and closed without sound. Other engineers at the table leaned forward, studying Michaela's napkin with growing excitement. "That might actually work," one finally admitted. Gabriel stood, offering Michaela his hand. "I believe that's our cue to say goodnight." As they made their way toward the exit, he couldn't resist placing a kiss on her temple. "You were magnificent." But Michaela's attention had caught on something else. Harrison Wells huddled in a corner with Victoria Chen and 3 other board members, their faces dark with purpose as they whispered urgently. When they noticed her watching, they quickly dispersed, but the memory of their conspiratorial expressions sent a chill down her spine. The chandelier cast soft shadows across the penthouse's marble floors as Michaela tossed in their king-sized bed. Sleep refused to come. Gabriel's steady breathing beside her only highlighted her restlessness. The events from the dinner party kept replaying in her mind, not just her triumph over James Chen, but those furtive whispers she'd witnessed. With a quiet sigh, she slipped out of bed and padded to Gabriel's home office. Maybe some light reading would tire her mind. She settled into the leather chair and pulled up the company's latest quarterly reports on his computer, figuring she might as well learn more about the business world she'd married into. Numbers scrolled across the screen as she reviewed financial statements and performance metrics. At first, everything looked standard: revenue streams, operational costs, profit margins. But something caught her eye. A pattern in the manufacturing efficiency ratings seemed familiar. Michaela leaned closer, her mechanic's mind clicking into gear. These variations weren't random. They followed a rhythm she recognized from rigged diagnostic machines she'd encountered at shady repair shops. The numbers were just a little too perfect, the patterns too predictable. She printed the pages, marking sections with a highlighter as dawn crept over Chicago's skyline. When Gabriel emerged from the bedroom in his silk robe, she was waiting at the breakfast table, papers spread before her. "Good morning, love," he said, kissing her cheek. "You're up early. Gabriel, I need to show you something." She pulled out the highlighted sections. "Look at these efficiency ratings. See how they repeat in this specific pattern? In my experience, real machinery never produces results this consistent. It reminds me of when shops use rigged diagnostic tools to fool inspectors." Gabriel glanced at the papers while stirring cream into his coffee. "Honey, I appreciate your attention to detail, but our auditing teams are the best in the business. These reports go through multiple layers of verification. But really, there's nothing to worry about." He squeezed her shoulder. "You've had a stressful few days. Why don't you take some time to settle in? Maybe explore the city?" Michaela felt the gentle dismissal like a punch to the gut, but she forced a smile. "You're probably right." But she wasn't convinced. Over the next 2 days, while Gabriel attended board meetings, she dove deep into research. The penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows became her investigation board as she taped up printouts of public filings, news articles, and employee reviews from job websites. Each evening, she would casually mention small details she'd found. "The maintenance costs seem high for new equipment," she'd say over dinner. Or, "Have you noticed the inventory turnover rates don't match industry standards?" Gabriel would listen patiently, but his responses remained the same. Gentle reassurances that she was overthinking things, that the company's systems were foolproof. On the 3rd evening, Michaela decided to treat herself to dinner at a small Italian restaurant near their building. She chose a quiet corner booth, hoping to clear her head. But fate had other plans. 2 men in expensive suits settled into the booth behind her, their voices carrying clearly despite their attempts at discretion. She recognized them as executives from the dinner party. "Can you believe Grant married that mechanic?" one said, laughing. "Victoria's furious, says it's an embarrassment to the company." "Well, she won't be a problem much longer," the other replied. "Harrison's handling the financial adjustments. Once the dust settles—" Their voices dropped lower, but Michaela had heard enough. Her hands shook as she paid her bill and hurried home. The penthouse was dark when she arrived, Gabriel still at a late meeting. Michaela spread her research across the living room floor, connecting dots she'd been afraid to connect before: the irregular maintenance costs, the too-perfect efficiency ratings, the suspicious inventory numbers, the whispered conversations. Sitting cross-legged among the papers, surrounded by the glittering Chicago skyline, Michaela felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. Something was very wrong at Gabriel's company, and it wasn't just about her. Someone was deliberately manipulating the numbers, sabotaging the company from within. She stared at a photo from the company's website, the board of directors standing proudly in front of their headquarters. The same people who'd interrogated her, who'd whispered in corners, who'd discussed financial adjustments in restaurants. Their smiles seemed different now, hiding secrets in plain sight. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through the empty penthouse. Michaela gathered the papers into careful piles, her mind racing. She knew what she'd found. The question was, what would she do about it? The morning sun cast long shadows across Michigan Avenue as Michaela approached the gleaming corporate headquarters of Grant Enterprises. Her heart pounded, but her steps remained steady. She had dressed carefully in a navy business suit, professional enough to blend in, yet not trying too hard to impress. The security guard nodded as she showed her newly issued spouse ID card. "Good morning, Mrs. Grant." The title still felt strange, like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the 14th floor, remembering the shy financial analyst she'd met at the dinner party. Marcus Chen. He had seemed different from the others, more genuine in his conversation. She found him at his desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and empty coffee cups. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Mrs. Grant, what brings you here?" Michaela smiled warmly, keeping her voice low. "Please, call me Michaela. Do you have a minute to chat? Maybe we could grab coffee?" Marcus glanced around nervously before nodding. In the building's cafe, they chose a quiet corner table. Michaela pulled out several printed sheets, pointing to highlighted sections. "I noticed some patterns in these quarterly reports." She began gently. "The efficiency ratings show unusual consistency. In my experience with machinery, these numbers don't reflect real-world performance." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. I'm not supposed to discuss internal financials." "I understand," Michaela said softly. "But something feels wrong here, and I think you've noticed it too." The young analyst was quiet for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "About 6 months ago, we started getting strange directives from upper management. They wanted us to adjust certain metrics, standardize variations. When I questioned it, they said it was to protect investor confidence." He glanced around anxiously. "Please don't tell anyone we talked. I can't lose this job. I have student loans, my mum's medical bills." "Your secret is safe with me," Michaela assured him, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for being honest." Back in the penthouse, Michaela spread everything across the dining room table: financial reports, her notes from Marcus, public records, and news clippings. As she organized the information chronologically, a disturbing pattern emerged. The adjusted numbers weren't just covering up poor performance, they were hiding massive amounts of missing money. She worked through lunch, creating a detailed timeline in a black binder. The evidence was clear. Someone on the board was orchestrating an elaborate embezzlement scheme, siphoning millions of dollars through manipulated efficiency reports and inflated maintenance costs. When Gabriel came home that evening, she was waiting. "We need to talk," she said, leading him to the table. "I know you trust your board, but something is very wrong at Grant Enterprises." She walked him through her findings, page by page, the irregular patterns she'd first noticed, Marcus's confirmation of management directives, the missing money traced through manipulated reports. Gabriel's face grew increasingly pale as he followed her logic. "This can't be. These people have been with the company for years." Before he could fully process the revelation, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Victoria Hammond, the board chair. "Emergency clarification meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Both you and your wife must attend." The next morning, they entered the boardroom together. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her expression carved from ice. Other board members lined both sides, their faces masks of controlled hostility. "Mrs. Brooks," Victoria began, deliberately using Michaela's maiden name, "we understand you've been making serious accusations about our company's financial practices." "Not accusations," Michaela replied calmly. "Just observations based on your unauthorized access to confidential information." Another board member cut in. "Your amateur analysis of complex financial data you're not qualified to understand." "The numbers don't lie," Michaela insisted, reaching for her binder. "If you'll just look at the pattern." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "The pattern we see is clear. A woman with no business experience marries our CEO and immediately begins undermining confidence in our company's integrity." "That's enough." Gabriel stood, his voice sharp. "Michaela has done nothing wrong. In fact, she's discovered discrepancies that deserve serious investigation." Victoria's smile was cold. "I believe we've heard enough. The board has called an emergency vote regarding your position as CEO." "You can't do this," Gabriel protested, but the vote was already happening. Hands raised around the table, one after another. "The board has lost confidence in your leadership," Victoria announced. "You have been compromised by your personal situation. Effective immediately, you are removed as CEO of Grant Enterprises." Security guards appeared in the doorway. Gabriel stood tall, taking Michaela's hand. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "The truth has a way of coming out." Together, they walked to the elevator, heads held high despite the whispers and stares. Through the lobby's glass doors, they could see reporters gathering, cameras flashing like lightning. Michaela squeezed Gabriel's hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he replied, his voice steady. "You did the right thing. We'll face whatever comes next together." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped in, still hand in hand. As they descended, camera flashes continued to strobe through the glass walls, capturing their united front in the face of betrayal. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the interstate as Gabriel's Mustang headed east toward Detroit. Neither of them had spoken much since leaving Chicago. The radio hummed quietly, filling the heavy silence between them. Michaela watched the familiar landmarks appear. Old factories, weathered billboards, the bridge over the Rouge River that always meant she was almost home. Gabriel's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. "We could go anywhere. I need to be somewhere real right now." Michaela replied, touching his arm. "Somewhere people see me, not just what they think I am." As they turned onto her old street, the familiar sight of Murphy's garage came into view. The red brick building looked exactly as she remembered, worn but proud, with its hand-painted sign and collection of carefully tended flowers in old tires along the fence. Before they could even get out of the car, Mrs. Washington from next door was already hurrying across the street, her gray hair catching the sunlight. "Lord have mercy. Is that Michaela Brooks? Get over here, child." Michaela found herself wrapped in a warm embrace that smelled of vanilla and fabric softener. "Hi, Mrs. Washington." she said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "We saw you on the news," Mrs. Washington said, holding her at arm's length. "All those fancy people trying to tear you down, well, they don't know you like we do." More neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Mr. Chen from the corner store brought over bottles of Michaela's favorite grape soda. Miss Ruby appeared with a covered dish of her famous mac and cheese. Soon the garage's small office was filled with familiar faces and the comfort of home. "This is my husband, Gabriel." Michaela introduced him proudly. Despite everything, her heart still lifted saying those words. Gabriel shook hands warmly, his CEO polish falling away as he relaxed into the genuine welcome. "Thank you all for having us," he said simply. Mr. Murphy, who'd owned the garage for 30 years, cleared a space on his cluttered desk. "Now tell us what's really going on, girl. Not that nonsense they're saying on TV." Michaela took a deep breath and began explaining. The strange numbers she'd noticed, the patterns that didn't add up, the way the board had reacted when she started asking questions. As she talked, she saw Mr. Rodriguez, her old high school math teacher, listening intently from his corner chair. "Show me those numbers again," he said when she finished. He'd always believed in her talent with patterns, even when others doubted. She pulled out her binder, and soon they had papers spread across every surface. Mr. Rodriguez put on his reading glasses, muttering calculations under his breath. "You're right," he said, finally. "These variations aren't random. They're systematic. Someone's hiding something big." 3 mechanics who'd known Michaela since she was a teenager gathered around, their practical minds turning over the problem. Tommy, who could diagnose an engine by sound alone, pointed to a series of maintenance costs. "Look here, they're reporting parts and labor that don't match any normal repair schedule. It's like saying you need a new transmission every month." "Exactly!" Michaela exclaimed. "That's how they're moving the money, through inflated maintenance costs and efficiency losses that don't exist." Miss Ruby appeared with plates of food. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread still warm from the oven. "You can't fight crooks on an empty stomach," she declared, shooing everyone to make room. As they ate, the conversation turned to strategy. Mr. Rodriguez offered to help analyze the data more thoroughly. Tommy and the other mechanics volunteered to document proper maintenance costs as evidence. Even Mrs. Washington had connections at the local newspaper. Gabriel watched it all with growing amazement. Here was a community coming together, offering whatever they could to help. No hidden agendas, no political maneuvering, just people who knew right from wrong and weren't afraid to stand up for it. As the evening wound down, Michaela led Gabriel upstairs to her childhood apartment above the garage. The space was small but clean, kept ready by Mr. Murphy for visiting family. Family. That's what these people were, bound by something stronger than blood. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first," Gabriel said as they settled onto the old couch. "I was so used to trusting the system, I couldn't see how corrupt it had become." Michaela leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We'll figure this out together," she said. "All of us." Outside, the street lights flickered on one by one. Through the window, they could hear the familiar sounds of the neighborhood. Children playing basketball, someone's radio, the distant rumble of trains. It was a different world from Chicago's gleaming towers, but here they found something precious: truth, support, and the strength to keep fighting. As they prepared for bed in the small apartment, surrounded by Michaela's childhood memories, their hearts were lighter than they'd been all day. Whatever battles lay ahead, they weren't facing them alone anymore. Mrs. Washington had made up the bed with fresh sheets that smelled of sunshine. "Stay as long as you need," she'd said, patting Michaela's cheek. "You're home now." Home. The word settled around them like a warm blanket as they got ready for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, But tonight they had found safe harbor in the heart of Detroit, where Michaela's roots ran deep and strong. The early morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Murphy's garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Michaela stood at a folding table they'd set up, sorting through stacks of financial documents. The familiar smell of motor oil and coffee mixed in the air as people began arriving, each bringing their own expertise to the makeshift investigation headquarters. "Morning, everyone," Michaela called out as Mr. Rodriguez walked in, carrying his laptop and a box of donuts. Gabriel followed close behind, having made a coffee run for the growing team. Tommy and two other mechanics had pushed their tool chests against the walls, making room for card tables and borrowed chairs. Charts and printouts now covered the walls where car posters once hung. The transformation from auto shop to investigation center was nearly complete. Around 10 o'clock, Mrs. Washington arrived with an unexpected guest. "This is Mr. Carlton," she announced. He did accounting for 40 years before retiring, and he still helps with the church books. The elderly man adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking at their wall of evidence. "Martha told me what you're dealing with," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've seen schemes like this before. Worked on a few fraud cases in my day." Michaela pulled up a chair for him. "We could really use your help, Mr. Carlton. These numbers keep leading us in circles." For the next several hours, Mr. Carlton guided them through the complex web of financial statements. His weathered finger traced paths through the documents, showing them how money could disappear into seemingly legitimate expenses. "See here." He pointed to a series of transactions. "These maintenance costs are being routed through shell companies. They look normal at first glance, but follow the money trail." He drew lines connecting different documents. It vanishes into fake vendors, then probably gets redirected to offshore accounts. Gabriel leaned forward, his face tightening. "Those are companies I was told were essential contractors. The board insisted on using them exclusively." "Because they control them," Michaela finished. "That's why they pushed you out when I started asking questions." Day after day, they dug deeper. The garage became their war room, with different stations set up for various aspects of the investigation. Tommy and his crew provided real maintenance costs for comparison, while Mr. Rodriguez applied his mathematical expertise to tracking patterns in the data. By Tuesday afternoon, they had filled 3 whiteboards with timelines and connections. Gabriel's corporate knowledge helped identify key players, while Mrs. Washington's church group brought in homemade meals to keep everyone going. "Look at this," Michaela said on Wednesday morning, spreading out a new set of documents. Every major equipment purchase in the last 3 years went through one of 5 companies. All of them were incorporated within months of each other. Mr. Carlton nodded slowly. "And I'll bet if we trace their ownership, they'll lead back to the same handful of people." Gabriel's phone buzzed constantly with messages from industry contacts, but he stayed focused on their work. His presence beside Michaela never wavered, even as headlines questioned his judgment and capability. The breakthrough came Wednesday evening. Mr. Rodriguez had been running numbers through statistical analysis software when he called everyone over. "These patterns are too perfect," he explained, pointing to his screen. "Real business fluctuations show more variance. These numbers have been manipulated to look natural while hiding consistent withdrawals." Michaela felt her heart racing as they followed the trail. Shell companies led to more shell companies, each layer hiding massive amounts of missing capital. The board hadn't just been skimming, they'd built an entire shadow system for extracting millions. By Thursday, exhaustion had set in. Empty coffee cups littered the tables, and their eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. Around 11 that night, Michaela stepped outside for air and pulled out her phone. "Pastor Helena, I'm sorry it's so late." "Never too late for you, child." The pastor's warm voice came through. "How are you holding up?" Michaela's voice cracked slightly. "We're close to something big, but sometimes I wonder if we're strong enough for this fight. Remember David facing Goliath?" Pastor Helena said softly. "Your strength isn't in your size. It's in your spirit and the truth you carry. Let me pray with you." As the pastor's gentle words washed over her, Michaela felt tears sliding down her cheeks. The prayer reminded her of all the battles she'd already won, all the times her community had lifted her up. Back inside, she found Gabriel organizing the day's findings. "Your pastor called me earlier," he said, pulling her close. "Reminded me that sometimes God puts us in hard places to do important work." Near midnight, Michaela stood before their evidence wall, letting her eyes trace the connections they'd uncovered. 5 years of systematic theft, dozens of fake companies, hundreds of millions diverted. The picture was finally complete, a massive conspiracy that had used Gabriel's trust against him while bleeding his company dry. Each piece they'd uncovered felt like a puzzle fragment, and now the full image was clear. The board hadn't just betrayed Gabriel, they'd orchestrated a scheme that affected thousands of employees and shareholders. Their greed had tentacles reaching into every aspect of the company's operations. Tommy appeared at her shoulder, handing her a fresh cup of coffee. "We got him, girl," he said quietly. "They thought nobody would look close enough, but they didn't count on you." Michaela nodded, her eyes still fixed on the wall. The evidence was undeniable now. All those nights studying engine manuals as a teenager, learning to trace problems to their source, it had prepared her for this moment. She might not have gone to an Ivy League school, but she knew how to spot when something wasn't running right. The midnight hour ticked past as she stood there, surrounded by the proof of corruption and the love of her community. In the quiet garage where she'd first learned to fix broken things, Michaela felt a deep certainty settle over her. They had found the truth. Now it was time to make it heard. Friday morning dawned with renewed purpose in Michaela's childhood home. She sat at the small kitchen table, her laptop open and multiple spreadsheets organized across the screen. The smell of fresh coffee filled the modest space as Gabriel worked beside her, his suit jacket draped over a worn kitchen chair. "We need to make this crystal clear," Michaela said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Even someone with no financial background should be able to follow the money trail." Gabriel nodded, reviewing a draft of his statement. "I'm detailing every board meeting where these purchases were approved. The dates line up perfectly with your timeline." They had transformed the living room into a makeshift office. Charts and diagrams covered the walls, each one telling part of the story. Michaela had color-coded the shell companies, creating visual webs that showed how money flowed between them. "Look at this pattern," she pointed out, pulling up a new spreadsheet. Every third Wednesday, exactly $2.5 million moved through these accounts. They thought the regular schedule would make it look legitimate. Throughout the morning, Michaela meticulously built her case. She created detailed PowerPoint slides, backing every claim with multiple sources. Her mechanical mind approached the task like diagnosing a complex engine, methodically testing each connection, ensuring no loose ends remained. By lunchtime, Gabriel had compiled a list of potential allies. "These 3 investigators have solid reputations," he explained while they made sandwiches together in the tiny kitchen. "And this law firm specializes in corporate fraud cases." The simple act of preparing lunch together, something they'd never done in their penthouse, brought them closer. Gabriel watched in amazement as Michaela somehow made simple bologna sandwiches taste gourmet with just a few spices from her mother's old cabinet. "You know," he said, washing dishes afterward, "I never thought I'd say this, but I feel more at home here than I ever did in that fancy apartment." Michaela smiled, drying the plates. "Sometimes you have to strip everything away to see what really matters." They worked through the afternoon, refining their presentation. Michaela created flowcharts showing how the board had manipulated equipment costs, while Gabriel documented instances where he'd been deliberately misled. Around 4 o'clock, Mrs. Washington from next door brought over a homemade casserole. "You two need to keep your strength up," she insisted, patting Michaela's shoulder. "Fighting the good fight takes energy." As evening approached, their case grew stronger. Michaela had assembled a master document linking every piece of evidence. Gabriel helped polish the language, making sure it would stand up to legal scrutiny. "I think we're ready," Michaela said, reviewing their work. "The numbers don't lie. We have proof of at least $320 million in misappropriated funds." Gabriel squeezed her hand. "You did what an entire team of auditors couldn't. You saw through their smokescreen." They were about to break for dinner when Michaela's phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a text. "Stop digging. Some things should stay buried. Final warning." Gabriel's face darkened as he read the message. "They're getting nervous. Maybe we should take a step back. Think about security first." But Michaela shook her head, her jaw set with determination. "If we back down now, they win. Think about all the people affected by their greed, employees, shareholders, families counting on those pensions." She pulled up her email and began composing a message to federal investigator Sarah Chen, whose contact information they'd verified earlier. With steady hands, she attached their core documents and wrote a clear summary of their findings. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Gabriel asked softly. "Once we send this, there's no going back." Michaela looked around the small room where she'd grown up, at the worn furniture that had hosted countless family discussions, at the walls that had witnessed her dreams of making a difference. Then she looked at Gabriel, who had chosen love over power, truth over comfort. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied. With unwavering resolve, she clicked send. The email disappeared into cyberspace, carrying with it their hopes for justice and their commitment to truth. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily as they sat in silence, knowing they had just changed the course of their lives forever. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, washing the Detroit streets clean as night settled over the city. Michaela's phone chimed early the next morning, startling her awake. She reached for it, her heart racing as she saw the sender. "Federal Investigation Unit, S. Chen." "Gabriel," she whispered, gently shaking her husband. The investigator responded. Gabriel sat up quickly, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Sunlight streamed through the worn curtains of her childhood bedroom as they read the message together. "Mrs. Grant, I've reviewed your initial documents. The allegations warrant immediate attention. Can you meet tomorrow at 2 o'clock? Bring all supporting evidence. Address attached. Investigator Chen." "Tomorrow?" Michaela's voice trembled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "We need to make sure everything's perfect." They skipped breakfast, diving straight into preparation. The living room became command central as they spread their documents across every available surface. Gabriel handled the financial statements, while Michaela organized her technical analysis of the equipment purchase records. "We should create backup copies of everything," Gabriel suggested, heading to the corner store for supplies. He returned with 3 identical binders, sticky notes, and highlighters. Throughout the morning, they rehearsed their presentation. Michaela practiced explaining complex financial patterns in simple terms, while Gabriel prepared to detail the board's suspicious behavior. They time-stamped every document, cross-referenced each claim, and created a clear timeline of events. "The key is staying focused," Gabriel advised, drawing from his years of corporate experience. "Start with the strongest evidence and build from there." Around noon, Mrs. Washington knocked on their door with a pot of her famous chicken soup. "Can't fight corruption on an empty stomach," she insisted. More neighbors followed, bringing coffee, sandwiches, and words of encouragement. By mid-afternoon, their supporters began gathering at the garage. Word had spread through the tight-knit community about their meeting the next day. Mr. Johnson, who'd taught Michaela math in high school, arrived with his wife. The retired accountant who'd helped analyze the data came with his entire family. Even the local grocery store owner closed early to join them. "Let's form a prayer circle," Pastor Richardson suggested. Everyone joined hands, forming a circle in the garage where Michaela had spent countless hours fixing cars. The familiar smell of motor oil mixed with the afternoon breeze as the pastor began to pray. "Lord, guide Michaela and Gabriel as they stand for truth," he said, his deep voice filling the space. "Give them wisdom, courage, and protection. Let justice prevail." Michaela felt tears welling up as her community surrounded them with love and support. These were the people who had watched her grow up, who had believed in her when she was just a girl dreaming of better things. That evening, they did one final review of their materials. 3 identical binders sat ready, each containing over 200 pages of evidence. Every document was labeled, every connection clearly explained. "We should try to get some sleep," Gabriel said around 11 o'clock. "Tomorrow's a big day." The next morning dawned clear and bright. They dressed carefully, Michaela in a professional blue suit she'd borrowed from Mrs. Washington's daughter, Gabriel in a simple dark suit that looked very different from his usual designer wear. The drive to the federal building took almost an hour. They held hands most of the way, drawing strength from each other's presence. The city skyline grew larger as they approached, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Security checked their IDs and escorted them to a conference room on the 10th floor. Investigator Sarah Chen was already waiting, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Grant, Mr. Grant." She greeted them professionally. "Please, sit down." Michaela took a deep breath and opened her binder. For the next 2 hours, she methodically presented their evidence. She explained how she'd first noticed the irregularities, tracked the money flow through shell companies, and identified the pattern of fraudulent equipment purchases. Gabriel supported her presentation with insider details about board meetings and suspicious directives. They showed emails, financial records, and the anonymous threat message. As they proceeded, Investigator Chen's expression grew increasingly serious. She took detailed notes, occasionally asking pointed questions that showed she grasped the magnitude of their discovery. She paused, looking at her pages of notes. "This is far bigger than I expected. The scale of this corruption is staggering." She spent several minutes reviewing key documents again before looking up at them. "I need to be clear about what happens next. Once we officially open this investigation, it will attract massive media attention. Your lives will change dramatically." "We understand," Michaela replied firmly. "Are you prepared to go public with this? The press will want to hear directly from you." Michaela exchanged looks with Gabriel before answering. "Yes, we're thinking about holding a press conference early next week." Investigator Chen nodded approvingly. "Good. That's the right approach. Take control of the narrative. I'll have my team start reviewing these materials immediately. Expect to hear from us within 48 hours. As they drove back to Detroit that evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Streetlights began flickering on, creating a trail of hope leading them home. Michaela's hand found Gabriel's across the console. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." Gabriel squeezed her hand, his eyes steady on the road ahead. "You did it, love. You saw what everyone else missed." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights brighten as dusk settled around them. The streetlights blinked past in steady rhythm, each one marking another step toward justice. Dawn had barely broken when Michaela's phone started buzzing incessantly. She reached for it, still groggy from sleep, and froze at the flood of notifications lighting up her screen. Her heart dropped as she opened the first news alert. Gold digger or genius? The truth behind Gabriel Grant's mystery wife. The headline sat above a series of photos, intimate moments between her and Gabriel that had been edited to look sinister. One showed them at the diner after their wedding, but the angle and lighting made their private conversation appear secretive and calculating. "Gabriel," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Something's wrong." He sat up quickly, grabbing his own phone. His face darkened as he scrolled through the messages. The board had launched an all-out media assault. Every major news outlet carried stories questioning Michaela's character and motives. "Look at this," Gabriel said, his voice tight with anger. He showed her an article claiming she had a history of mental instability. They had fabricated quotes from non-existent former employers, painting her as unstable and vindictive. Michaela's hands shook as she read another piece about her family. The board had dug into her past, twisting her humble Detroit upbringing into a narrative of desperation and schemes. They portrayed her father, who had died working double shifts to support the family, as a petty criminal. "How could they do this?" she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Gabriel tried logging into his bank account but found it locked. "They've frozen our accounts," he said grimly. "Both of us. They're claiming potential financial fraud." Michaela checked her own account. Same result. The small savings she'd worked so hard to build was now inaccessible. Her phone kept buzzing with calls from unknown numbers, reporters hungry for a story. Throughout the morning, the attacks grew worse. Social media exploded with doctored videos showing Michaela in compromising situations. Old photos from her days working at the garage were edited to suggest impropriety. Each new post felt like a physical blow. "We need to respond," Gabriel insisted, already calling their lawyer. But before he could reach anyone, more news broke. The board had filed legal motions questioning the validity of their marriage, claiming it was a ploy to manipulate company control. Around noon, Michaela's pastor called. His voice was gentle but worried. "The media is outside the church," he said. "They're asking all sorts of ugly questions about your character. We're standing with you, child, but it's getting ugly." Michaela could barely speak through her tears. "I'm so sorry to bring this to your door." By early afternoon, the situation had become unbearable. Every TV channel showed analysts debating her motives. Financial experts questioned her ability to understand corporate finances, suggesting she had manufactured evidence out of spite or confusion. "I need to go check on the garage," Michaela said suddenly, needing to escape the constant stream of hatred. "Make sure everything's secure." Gabriel insisted on driving her. As they approached the familiar street, Michaela saw something was wrong. Her heart stopped as they got closer. The garage, her sanctuary, her inheritance from her father, had been vandalized. Crude racial slurs were spray-painted across the front in angry red letters. Threatening messages covered the walls. "Gold digger, go home and stay in your place." Someone had smashed the windows and thrown paint everywhere. The tools she'd carefully organized were scattered and broken. The wall of evidence they'd assembled had been torn down, papers shredded and scattered like confetti. Michaela stood in the middle of the destruction, her legs barely holding her up. This garage had been her safe place since childhood. Now it felt violated, tainted. The weight of everything, the lies, the threats, the hatred, came crashing down at once. Her knees gave out, and Gabriel caught her as she collapsed. She buried her face in his chest, deep sobs racking her body. "I'm so sorry," she cried, clutching his shirt. "I've ruined everything. Your life, your career, everything you built. It's all destroyed because of me." Gabriel held her tighter, but she couldn't stop the words pouring out. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong in your world. I'm just a mechanic from Detroit. What made me think I could take on powerful people like this?" "Look at me," Gabriel said firmly. But Michaela kept her face hidden, tears soaking his shirt. "This isn't your fault," he insisted. "You exposed their corruption. They're attacking you because they're afraid of the truth." But Michaela was beyond comfort. Years of fighting to be taken seriously, of proving herself in a world that constantly underestimated her. It all felt meaningless now. They had turned her strength into weakness, her intelligence into calculation, her love into manipulation. That night, back in her childhood home, Michaela lay curled on her side, tears still flowing silently. Gabriel held her close, whispering words of comfort she couldn't quite hear through the roaring in her head. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hateful words on her garage walls. Every notification sound made her flinch, expecting more attacks. The fight had drained out of her, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. In the darkness, surrounded by the ruins of her confidence, Michaela finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. But even in dreams, she couldn't escape the feeling that her world was crumbling around her. Sunlight crept through the thin curtains of Michaela's childhood bedroom, but she couldn't find the energy to rise. Her body felt heavy, weighed down by yesterday's devastation. The hateful words spray-painted on her garage kept flashing through her mind. Gabriel quietly entered the room carrying a tray with toast, scrambled eggs, and fresh coffee. The simple kindness made her eyes water again. "You need to eat something," he said softly, setting the tray beside her. "Just a few bites." Michaela managed a small bite of toast, though it tasted like cardboard. Gabriel sat next to her, gently showing her his phone. "Look at these," he said. "They've been coming in all morning." They were messages from employees at the company. Dozens of them, sent through secure channels and burner phones. People she'd never even met were reaching out. "We believe in you, Mrs. Grant. Don't give up. The truth needs to come out. You're stronger than they are." One message from a junior accountant read, "I've watched them crush good people for years. You're the first person brave enough to stand up to them." Michaela's hands trembled as she read through them. Each message helped lift the fog of despair just a little. Around 2 o'clock that afternoon, they heard cars pulling up outside. Gabriel tensed, moving protectively toward the window, but then relaxed. "They're from the company," he said. "I recognize them." 5 people emerged from 2 separate vehicles, senior employees Michaela remembered from her brief time at the corporation. They carried boxes and laptop bags. The oldest was Eleanor Matthews, head of internal compliance, who had worked there for 32 years. Behind her came Thomas Chen from legal, Maria Suarez from finance, and 2 others Michaela didn't know. They approached cautiously, looking around as if worried about being followed. Eleanor's face crumpled when she saw the racist graffiti still visible on the garage walls. "Oh, my dear," she said, pulling Michaela into a fierce hug. "What they've done to you is shameful." Inside the garage, they unpacked their boxes. Flash drives clattered onto the workbench. Folders stuffed with documents emerged. Notebooks filled with handwritten observations were stacked carefully. "We've been collecting evidence for years," Thomas explained, his voice quiet but intense. "Each of us noticed things. Transactions that didn't add up, paperwork that disappeared, threats to anyone who asked questions." Maria spread out a series of spreadsheets. "Look here, these are the original numbers before they were adjusted for the board reports. I've been secretly saving copies for 3 years." Eleanor's hands shook as she pulled out her own records. "They forced out anyone who spoke up, made them sign NDAs, threatened their families, destroyed their reputations. We were all too scared to fight back alone." The other 2 employees, Janet from HR and Marcus from operations, nodded grimly. They had similar stories of witnessed corruption and enforced silence. "But then you came along?" Eleanor continued, reaching for Michaela's hand. You saw what was wrong and weren't afraid to say it. You gave us hope. Tears welled in Michaela's eyes as she looked at these people, successful professionals who had risked everything to bring her this information. Why now? She asked softly. Marcus spoke up. Because you proved it could be done. You showed us that someone could stand up to them and survive. Maybe not unscathed, but still standing. Janet added. And because you didn't do it for power or money, you did it because it was right. Eleanor squeezed Michaela's hand. Her voice was thick with emotion as she said, Honey, fix this engine. We're all counting on you. The simple words, comparing the corrupt company to a broken-down car, struck something deep in Michaela's heart. This was what she did. She fixed things that others said couldn't be fixed. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, spreading papers across every surface. Gabrielle ordered pizza, and they ate while connecting dots that had been invisible when viewed separately. The new evidence filled in crucial gaps. Marcus's operations records showed exactly how money was being diverted. Janet's HR files revealed the pattern of silencing whistleblowers. Thomas's legal notes documented the careful construction of shell companies. Hour by hour, the full picture emerged. The board hadn't just been embezzling. They'd built an entire shadow operation, using the company's resources for private gain, while threatening anyone who got close to the truth. The others left around midnight, but Michaela kept working. Gabriel tried to convince her to rest, but she couldn't stop. She was running on coffee and determination, fueled by the trust these people had placed in her. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she sat back, her eyes burning but mind crystal clear. The entire scheme was laid out before her. Every fake transaction, every threatened employee, every hidden account. She had it all. More importantly, she had proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. The board members' own documents condemned them. Their carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. For the first time since the attacks began, Michaela felt the fire of purpose burning away her fear. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Eleanor, Thomas, Maria, and countless others who had suffered in silence. She stood at her workbench, surrounded by evidence of corruption, and finally saw the complete blueprint of the board's crimes. Like a master mechanic diagnosing a complex engine failure, she knew exactly what needed to be fixed and how to fix it. Sunlight was just starting to peek through the garage windows when Michaela opened her laptop. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed an urgent email to federal investigator James Wilson. The evidence from Eleanor and the others needed to reach him immediately. "Are you sure about this?" Gabriel asked softly, setting a fresh cup of coffee beside her. Michaela nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. "These people risked everything to help us. We owe it to them to move fast." She attached file after file, spreadsheets, testimonies, photographs of original documents. Each piece was carefully labeled and organized, just as she would arrange tools before tackling a complex repair job. The response came faster than expected. Her phone rang just 30 minutes later. "Ms. Brooks." Investigator Wilson's voice was tense with urgency. "I've only looked at the first few files, but this changes everything. I'm escalating this to our corporate fraud division right now." Michaela's heart raced as she put him on speaker so Gabriel could hear. "How soon can you act?" "We're mobilizing teams as we speak, but we need you to present this formally, tomorrow morning. Can you prepare a complete breakdown of the evidence?" "Yes," Michaela said firmly. "I'll be ready." After hanging up, she and Gabriel transformed the garage into a war room. They cleared the central workbench and began organizing their presentation. Gabriel's corporate experience proved invaluable as he helped structure the complex information into clear, compelling segments. "Start with the big picture," he advised, sketching out a timeline. Show them the pattern first, then zoom in on specific examples. Michaela worked methodically, the same way she would diagnose a stubborn engine problem. She created visual aids showing money flows, highlighted key documents, and prepared clear explanations of technical details. Around noon, several of her neighbors brought lunch, homemade sandwiches and fresh lemonade. They gathered around, offering encouragement and practical help. Miss Ruby, who taught high school public speaking, gave Michaela tips on delivery. Mr. Washington, who owned the local print shop, helped create professional-looking presentation boards. "Remember who you are," Miss Ruby said firmly. "Those fancy folks tried to make you feel small, but you've got truth on your side." As afternoon faded into evening, Gabriel checked them into a modest hotel in downtown Chicago. They needed to be close to the federal building for tomorrow's early meeting. The room was simple but clean, worlds away from his penthouse, but somehow more comforting. Michaela spread their materials across the small desk, reviewing everything one last time. Gabriel ordered a light dinner from room service, making sure she ate despite her nervousness. "I keep thinking about Eleanor," Michaela said softly. "And all the others who were silenced. How many careers were destroyed? How many families suffered?" Gabriel wrapped his arms around her. "That's why we're doing this, not for revenge, but for justice." Around 9 o'clock, Michaela changed into her pajamas and knelt beside the bed. Prayer had always been her anchor, especially in tough times. Gabriel sat quietly nearby, respecting her moment with God. "Lord," she whispered, "I'm scared. These people have so much power, and I'm just a mechanic from Detroit. But I know you didn't bring me this far to fail now. Please give me the words tomorrow. Help me speak truth to power with clarity and courage." She thought about Eleanor's shaking hands, Thomas's quiet determination, Maria's careful record-keeping. She thought about her own neighborhood, standing with her despite the threats and vandalism. "Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." She continued, "Thank you for Gabriel, for our supporters, for bringing the truth to light. Whatever happens tomorrow, help me remember that you are in control." Rising from her knees, Michaela felt a sense of peace settle over her. The same peace she'd felt as a child, watching her father work on cars in their garage. The same peace that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done and having the tools to do it. Gabriel turned out the lights, leaving only the city glow through the window. "Try to sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow's a big day." Michaela climbed into bed, the unfamiliar mattress barely registering. Her mind was already moving through tomorrow's presentation, each point, each piece of evidence, each truth that needed to be told. The world that had mocked her was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful force for change comes from unexpected places. Sometimes it takes a mechanic to fix what the mighty have broken. As she drifted off, Michaela's last conscious thought was of Eleanor's words. Fix this engine. Tomorrow she would do exactly that. The January sunrise painted Chicago's federal building in shades of gold as Michaela and Gabriel walked through the heavy glass doors. Their footsteps echoed across the marble lobby, joining the quiet shuffle of early morning workers. Michaela clutched her leather briefcase, a gift from Gabriel, filled with evidence that would change everything. Security cleared them quickly, thanks to Investigator Wilson's advance arrangements. In the elevator, Gabriel squeezed her hand. "Ready?" Michaela nodded, drawing strength from his presence. The doors opened to reveal a conference room already filled with serious faces. Federal investigators, financial regulators, and legal experts gathered around a long table. Investigator Wilson greeted them warmly. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming. We've assembled our top team to review your findings." Michaela set up her presentation materials with steady hands, arranging documents and connecting her laptop to the projector. The room fell silent as she began. 3 months ago, I noticed something wrong in the quarterly reports. She started, her voice clear and strong. What began as irregular numbers led to a pattern of systematic theft spanning 7 years. She walked them through the evidence methodically, the way her father had taught her to explain complex engine problems. First, the big picture, showing how money disappeared through a maze of fake companies. Then the details, bank transfers, doctored reports, board meeting minutes that didn't match official records. "Here's where it gets worse," she said, pulling up a series of documents. They weren't just stealing, they were deliberately weakening the company's foundation. Their endgame was to strip everything of value and let it collapse. The room grew tenser with each revelation. Investigators scribbled notes furiously. Legal experts whispered urgently to each other. When Michaela showed proof of offshore accounts holding billions in stolen funds, someone cursed under their breath. "Ms. Brooks?" A senior regulator interrupted. "How did you connect these particular transfers? Our own auditors missed this entirely." "Engines have patterns," Michaela explained. "When something's wrong, the symptoms tell a story if you know how to read them. Money flows the same way. I tracked the irregularities like I would trace an oil leak, following the trail back to its source." For 3 hours, she laid out the evidence. Gabriel occasionally added context about corporate operations, but mostly he watched proudly as Michaela commanded the room with quiet authority. Near noon, the head investigator stood up. "We've seen enough. This is one of the largest corporate fraud cases we've encountered. We're initiating immediate action." The room erupted into controlled chaos. Teams dispatched to secure evidence. Phones buzzed with urgent calls. Within an hour, arrest warrants were being processed for every board member involved. "Asset freeze orders are going out now," Investigator Wilson informed them. "We're moving fast to prevent any last-minute transfers or evidence destruction." By early afternoon, word had spread. Reporters gathered on the courthouse steps, waiting for official statements. Michaela stood at the window, watching the growing crowd below. "They're ready for you," Gabriel said softly. "But only if you want to speak." Michaela thought of Eleanor, of all the employees who'd risked everything to support her. Yes, people need to know the truth. They took the elevator down together. Just before the doors opened to the main floor, Gabriel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I'm so proud of you." Camera flashes exploded as they stepped outside. Microphones thrust forward. Shouted questions filled the air. Michaela approached the podium that had been set up, Gabriel's arm still steady around her. "My name is Michaela Brooks," she began, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. 3 months ago, I married Gabriel Grant. Many of you mocked that marriage, called me a gold digger, questioned my motives." She paused, meeting the sea of cameras with unwavering eyes. "What you didn't know was that I grew up fixing broken engines in Detroit. I learned that every machine tells the truth if you listen carefully enough. When I saw problems in my husband's company's reports, I listened. What I found was a massive fraud scheme that would have destroyed thousands of jobs and retirement accounts." The reporters leaned forward, hanging on every word as Michaela described the investigation. She kept technical details simple, focusing on the human cost, the employees who'd been silenced, the families who would have lost everything. "Today, federal authorities are arresting those responsible," she concluded. "The truth can't be buried forever. Sometimes it just takes someone with different tools to dig it out." Questions erupted again. Cameras flashed. Headlines already started appearing on phones throughout the crowd. "Mechanic turned whistleblower exposes billion-dollar fraud. Detroit mechanic saves major corporation from internal sabotage. Michaela Brooks, from ridiculed to respected." Gabriel held her close as they navigated through the media frenzy. Their car waited at the bottom of the steps, ready to take them back to Detroit. back to the garage where it all started. As they drove away, Michaela spotted newspaper stands being updated with afternoon editions. Her story was already spreading, but this time the headlines celebrated her courage instead of mocking her marriage. The truth had finally come to light, carried forward by a mechanic who knew that every broken system can be fixed if you're brave enough to look under the hood. Dawn broke over Chicago's skyline, painting the hotel room windows in soft orange light. Michaela stirred from a fitful sleep, her hand automatically reaching for Gabriel beside her. The events of yesterday felt almost dreamlike. The federal briefing, the arrests, her statement on the courthouse steps. The television hummed quietly in the background, but a sudden increase in volume caught her attention. Gabriel had turned it up, his expression intense as he watched breaking news footage. "In a stunning development this morning," the anchor announced, "federal agents are conducting simultaneous arrests of board members from Grant Industries. Sources confirm at least 7 executives were taken into custody before sunrise." Michaela sat up, wrapping the hotel's plush robe around herself as she moved closer to watch. Helicopter footage showed familiar faces being led out of mansion driveways in handcuffs. These were the same people who had sneered at her across boardroom tables, who had tried to destroy her reputation. "This is really happening," she whispered. Gabriel squeezed her shoulder gently. Her phone buzzed, a cascade of messages and notifications flooding in. Shareholders were demanding emergency meetings. The company's stock had been temporarily frozen. Legal teams were scrambling to arrange emergency hearings. "We need to get dressed," Gabriel said softly. "The investigators want us at the federal building by 9 o'clock. The next few hours passed in a blur. They sat through detailed questioning, providing context for document after document. Michaela's mechanical notebooks, filled with her precise diagrams tracking money flows like engine systems, became central evidence. By afternoon, more revelations emerged. Investigators discovered hidden accounts in tax havens across the globe. Shell companies nested within shell companies. The scope of corruption stretched back decades. "It's like they built a whole fake engine around the real one," Michaela explained to one investigator, sketching on a legal pad. "They created so much noise and distraction that nobody could hear the actual machine breaking down underneath." The days began to blur together. Each morning brought new hearings, new depositions, new evidence to review. Michaela and Gabriel barely saw their hotel room except to sleep. They ate quick meals between meetings, sometimes just holding hands in silence, processing the magnitude of what was unfolding. On the 4th day, something shifted. The legal teams called them into a private conference room overlooking the city. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as lawyers spread documents across a massive table. "Ms. Brooks," the lead attorney began, "we've uncovered something significant. The board didn't just embezzle money, they illegally diluted and hid shares of the company through an elaborate scheme of fake holdings." She nodded. She had suspected as much from the patterns she'd found. "The court has made an unprecedented ruling," he continued. "All illegally hidden shares must be returned and redistributed to the harmed parties. This includes employees whose stock options were manipulated, pension funds that were cheated, and—" He paused, sliding a document forward. "The person who exposed the fraud." Michaela stared at the paper, trying to process the numbers she was seeing. Gabriel leaned forward, his breath catching. "This transfer of shares," the lawyer explained gently, "makes you the majority shareholder of Grant Industries, Ms. Brooks, by a significant margin." The room spun slightly. Michaela gripped the edge of the table, her other hand finding Gabriel's instinctively. From a small garage in Detroit to majority owner of a global corporation, all because she'd refused to ignore broken patterns. I don't understand," she managed. "How can I possibly—" "You saved the company," another lawyer interjected. "You protected thousands of jobs, pensions, livelihoods. The court sees this as appropriate restitution." They spent hours reviewing the details, but Michaela felt almost disconnected from her body, watching herself nod and sign papers. Her hands trembled slightly. These same hands that had changed oil and rebuilt engines now held the future of a corporate empire. As evening settled over the city, they finally returned to their hotel room. Michaela stood at the window, watching lights flicker on across the skyline. Everything looked different now. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders. She felt Gabriel's presence before she heard him move. He knelt beside her chair, taking her work-roughened hands in his. His eyes shone with pride and love as he pressed gentle kisses to her knuckles. "You saved everything they tried to destroy," he whispered. In that quiet moment, as Chicago glittered beyond the glass and her husband knelt before her with such tender reverence, Michaela finally let the tears fall. They weren't tears of fear or triumph, but of pure overwhelm at how far she'd come, at how much trust was now placed in her, at how love and truth had carried her through the darkness. Gabriel held her hand steady, anchoring her in the storm of emotion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new heights to navigate. But tonight, in this peaceful room high above the city, Michaela allowed herself to simply feel the magnitude of all that had changed, and all that love had made possible. The morning sun cast long shadows across Michigan Avenue as their car pulled up to Grant Industries' towering headquarters. Michaela's hand smoothed her navy blazer, a far cry from her usual mechanic's coveralls. Gabriel squeezed her hand gently before they stepped out into the crisp air. "Ready?" he asked softly. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Ready?" The lobby fell silent as they walked through the revolving doors. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. The sound spread like ripples on water, building into thunderous applause. Employees lined the marble atrium, their faces bright with hope and relief. Sandra from accounting wiped tears from her eyes as she approached. "Welcome home," she whispered, hugging Michaela tightly. They made their way through the crowd, accepting handshakes and words of encouragement. The same security guard who had escorted them out in shame now stood at attention, beaming with pride as he guided them to the executive elevator. The boardroom looked different now. Gone were the stern portraits of former directors, replaced by clear glass walls that let in natural light. Nearly 100 senior employees packed the space, with more watching via video feed throughout the building. Michaela's heels clicked against the hardwood as she approached the podium. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her notes, but her voice rang clear and strong. "Good morning," she began. "1 month ago, I stood in this room as an outsider, a mechanic who dared to question what she saw. Today, I stand here as majority shareholder, but more importantly, as someone who believes in fixing what's broken." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "When I first noticed the irregularities in our financials, I approached it like I would any engine problem, by tracking patterns, testing systems, and trusting my instincts when something felt wrong. What I found was more than just creative accounting. It was a betrayal of trust that affected every person in this building." Heads nodded throughout the room. Many had suspected problems but felt powerless to speak up. "Starting today, Grant Industries operates under new principles: complete transparency, ethical leadership, and most importantly, a culture where every employee feels safe reporting concerns. No more hiding behind complicated structures or intimidation tactics. We're going to rebuild this company the right way, piece by piece." She outlined the immediate changes: new oversight committees, protected whistleblower channels, profit-sharing adjustments that benefited all employees, not just executives. When she announced Gabriel's reinstatement as CEO, reporting directly to her as majority shareholder, the room erupted in applause. Gabriel stepped forward to speak, his presence commanding yet humble. "I failed you all by trusting the wrong people and not listening to the right ones," he admitted. "That changes now. Together with Michaela's leadership, we're creating a company we can all be proud of again." The next several days blurred into a whirlwind of activity. Michaela and Gabriel worked late into each evening, reviewing departments and meeting with employees at all levels. They promoted Sandra to head of internal audit, knowing her integrity would help prevent future abuse. The brave employees who had brought evidence to Detroit received both bonuses and new positions of responsibility. They hired a diverse group of new board members, including a union representative and an environmental scientist, to ensure multiple perspectives in decision-making. Michaela insisted on maintaining an open-door policy, making herself available to hear concerns from anyone in the company. "Your mechanical mind sees things others miss," Gabriel told her one evening as they reviewed proposals. "You understand how all the parts need to work together." She smiled, thinking of her old garage. An engine won't run if even one component is out of alignment. A company's the same way. Everyone has to work together, with respect and trust. A week after their return, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Michaela stood in Gabriel's office on the top floor. The city stretched out before her, a maze of streets and buildings she once thought belonged to a different world than hers. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, remembering the grease-stained concrete floor of her family's garage in Detroit. The tools she'd inherited from her father still sat in their worn leather case, now displayed proudly on a shelf in her new office. They reminded her daily of where she came from and why she fought so hard to protect what was right. The door opened softly behind her as Gabriel entered, loosening his tie after another long day of meetings. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just thinking about how far we've come," she replied. "From fixing cars to fixing corporations. My dad always said every broken thing deserves a chance to work right again." Gabriel slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "You gave this company that chance. You gave all of us that chance." Together they watched the city lights begin to twinkle on, one by one, like stars emerging at dusk. The office behind them still held stacks of work to be done, departments to reorganize, policies to reform, trust to rebuild. But for now, in this quiet moment, Michaela allowed herself to simply be present in the magnitude of the journey. From a modest garage in Detroit to the highest office in Chicago's business district, she had traveled so far. Yet her heart remained unchanged. She would always be the mechanic who believed in fixing what was broken, protecting what was precious, and standing firm in what was right. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the old Detroit garage, illuminating decades of memories etched into its weathered walls. Michaela Brooks stood in the center, blueprints spread across a makeshift table, her heart full of purpose. This space, where she had first learned to decode engines and trust her instincts, would become something even more precious, a beacon of hope for the next generation. "We'll need to reinforce this whole section," she explained to the construction foreman, her finger tracing the plans. "I want proper classroom space here, with plenty of natural light. The workshop area needs to double in size." Grant watched from the doorway, his suit jacket draped over one arm in the summer heat. He smiled, seeing how naturally she had transitioned from corporate boardrooms back to her roots. Here, among the familiar scents of motor oil and metal, she was most herself. Over the next several hours, volunteers from Grant Industries arrived in waves, engineers, accountants, and office workers who had chosen to spend their weekend helping rebuild. Many had never held construction tools before, but they worked eagerly under the guidance of local contractors. My grandfather was a mechanic, shared one senior VP as he helped clear debris. He would have loved to see something like this. Michaela moved through the space, directing teams and sharing her vision. The garage would become the Brooks Community Engineering Center, offering free training programs for underprivileged youth interested in STEM fields. The plans included state-of-the-art equipment, computer labs, and workspace for hands-on learning. Pastor Helena arrived mid-morning, bringing containers of homemade lemonade for the workers. She found Michaela reviewing electrical plans with an engineer. "Child, look at what God has made possible through you," she said warmly, embracing her former student. Michaela's eyes grew misty. "I just want to give these kids what my father gave me, a chance to learn, to create, to believe in themselves." "And so much more," Pastor Helena assured her. "You're showing them they can overcome any obstacle, reach any height." Throughout the day, neighbors stopped by to watch the transformation. Elderly Mrs. Johnson, who had lived across the street for 40 years, brought her grandchildren to see the progress. "My babies are going to learn right here," she declared proudly, "in our own neighborhood, with someone who looks like them showing the way." As the renovation continued over several days, Michaela worked tirelessly to establish the center's programs. She created partnerships with local schools, developed curriculum with experienced teachers, and set up scholarship funds for promising students. "We'll offer evening classes for working parents," she explained during a community meeting. "Weekend workshops for younger children, special programs for girls interested in engineering. No one gets turned away for lack of funds." Gabriel helped coordinate corporate sponsorships and equipment donations, watching with pride as Michaela built something extraordinary. She had taken her position as majority shareholder of Grant Industries and transformed it into a force for positive change. One afternoon, he found her sitting alone in what would become the main classroom, lost in thought. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, wiping away a tear. "My dad used to say that knowledge was the most valuable tool in his box. He taught me everything he knew, believing I could go further than he ever dreamed. I just wish he could see this." "He sees it," Gabriel assured her, squeezing her shoulder. "Through every life you're going to change here." After 2 weeks of intensive work, the Brooks Community Engineering Center was ready for its grand opening. The transformed space gleamed with possibility. Modern workstations filled with tools, bright classrooms equipped with the latest technology, and walls adorned with inspiring quotes and images of diverse scientists and engineers throughout history. The neighborhood gathered for the ceremony, filling the street with celebration. Children pressed their faces against the windows, eager to explore the new computers and equipment. Parents clutched registration forms, hope bright in their eyes. Pastor Helena stepped forward to bless the center, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Lord, we thank you for this vision made real through your servant Michaela. May this place be a lighthouse of learning, a sanctuary of growth, and a testament to the power of believing in our children." "Amen," the crowd responded in unison. Michaela took her place at the podium, her heart pounding with emotion. The faces before her reflected her own journey. From the elderly neighbors who had watched her grow up, to the young girls clutching their mother's hands, dreams already taking root in their minds. "This center," she began, her voice strong and clear, "is built on love. The love of a father who taught his daughter she could fix anything. The love of a community that believed in her even when the world didn't. The love of a partner who stands beside her in every battle." She smiled at Gabriel, who watched proudly from the front row. "But most importantly, it's built on the love we have for you, the next generation of builders, creators, and dreamers. In this place, you will learn that your minds are powerful, your ideas matter, your future is limitless. She gestured to the newly painted sign above the door. The Brooks Community Engineering Center isn't just about learning mechanics or engineering. It's about understanding that you belong in any room, at any table, making any decision that affects our world. We'll teach you about engines and electronics, yes, but we'll also teach you about courage, persistence, and the power of believing in yourself. The older women of the neighborhood, who had watched Michaela grow from a curious child to a powerful leader, began to call out encouragement. "Tell it, baby. That's our girl. Show them the way." Michaela's voice grew stronger, lifted by their support. "Today, we open more than just doors. We open possibilities. We open futures. We open hearts to the truth that greatness can grow anywhere if we just give it room to flourish." The crowd erupted in cheers as she cut the ribbon, officially opening the center. Children rushed inside, eager to explore. Parents filled out registration forms while community leaders discussed volunteer opportunities. The atmosphere hummed with hope and possibility. Pastor Helena found Michaela in a quiet moment, watching the activity from the doorway of her father's old office, now a career counseling room. "Your daddy would be bursting with pride," she said softly. "You've taken his legacy and multiplied it 1,000-fold. Michaela smiled through happy tears. "This is just the beginning, Pastor. Just the beginning." The early Sunday morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Hope Community Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Michaela stood in the small back room where she had once attended Sunday school, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her ivory dress. "Let me help you with that veil, baby." Mrs. Johnson, her old next-door neighbor, stepped forward. The elderly woman's eyes glistened with tears as she carefully arranged the delicate lace. "I remember when you used to climb trees in overalls. Now look at you, saving companies and changing lives." Michaela squeezed her hand. "Those overalls taught me everything I needed to know about climbing corporate ladders." Down the hall, Gabriel adjusted his tie in another room, surrounded by Michaela's uncles and cousins who had practically adopted him as their own. Unlike their first rushed courthouse ceremony, today would be a proper celebration, a renewal of vows that honored not just their love, but the journey that had forged them into something stronger. The church filled quickly. Factory workers sat beside executives. Children from the engineering center squeezed into pews with corporate lawyers. Michaela's pastor had insisted on a bigger ceremony this time, saying their story deserved to be witnessed by all whose lives they had touched. When the piano began to play, Gabriel took his place at the altar. His breath caught as Michaela appeared in the doorway. She walked slowly down the aisle, each step carrying the weight of their shared battles and victories. The morning sun illuminated her face, highlighting the quiet strength in her eyes that had stared down boardrooms full of corruption and emerged victorious. Pastor Helena smiled warmly as they joined hands before her. "Dearly beloved," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed church. "We gather today to celebrate not just the renewal of marriage vows, but the power of love to transform lives and communities. These two souls before us have weathered storms that would break many others. Yet here they stand, stronger for having faced those winds together." Michaela's voice wavered with emotion as she spoke her vows. "Gabriel, when we first married, I promised to stand beside you in all things. I didn't know then how deeply that promise would be tested. But through every challenge, every betrayal, every moment of doubt, you never let go of my hand. You believed in me when the world mocked us. You stood firm when others tried to break us. Today, I renew my promise to walk beside you, to fight for what's right, and to face whatever comes next with the same courage and faith that brought us here." Gabriel's eyes shone as he responded, "Michaela, you came into my life like a miracle, showing me what real strength looks like. When I lost everything, you taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or boardrooms. It's in the integrity of your actions and the courage to stand for truth. You didn't just save my company, you saved my soul. I renew my vows today with a deeper love and respect than I knew was possible, promising to support your dreams, stand firm in your battles, and thank God every day for bringing you into my life." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Pastor Helena pronounced them husband and wife again. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old building. After the ceremony, the entire gathering made their way down the street to the Brooks Community Engineering Center. Children broke free from their parents' hands and ran ahead, shouting Michaela's name. She knelt down to embrace them, her fancy dress forgotten, as tiny arms wrapped around her neck. "Miss Michaela, I built a robot yesterday," one little girl exclaimed proudly. "And I fixed my dad's radio." Another chimed in. Gabriel watched with a tender smile as his wife's face lit up with each child's story. This was her element, not the corporate boardrooms where she now commanded respect, but here among the next generation of dreamers and builders. The center's main room had been transformed for the celebration, with tables of food prepared by neighborhood families and decorations crafted by the engineering students. Photos lined the walls, Michaela and Gabriel at the opening ceremony, children presenting their first projects, community classes in session. Each image told a story of transformation and hope. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the windows, Michaela found a quiet moment to stand in her father's old office. The space now housed career counseling services, but she could still feel his presence in every corner. Gabriel found her there, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Penny for your thoughts." She leaned back against him, watching the celebration through the window. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, the world was laughing at us, the mechanic who dared to marry a CEO. Now they stand in awe of your strength." Gabriel finished softly. "Your integrity, your compassion." Through the window, they could see their guests mingling, corporate executives chatting with local mechanics, children showing off their projects to impressed investors, former board members who had supported them, sharing meals with neighborhood families. It was a vision of what was possible when barriers came down and people believed in something bigger than themselves. "This is only the beginning," Gabriel whispered in her ear. Michaela smiled, her heart full of peace and purpose. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, rich with hope, and founded on justice in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the community that had shaped her and the love that had sustained her. She knew with certainty that their greatest chapters were still to come. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, its light touching everything with gold. The children playing, the adults laughing, the future unfolding one dream at a time. It was a perfect ending to this chapter of their story, and a beautiful beginning for all that lay ahead. The evening air grew cooler as Michaela and Gabriel said their goodbyes to the last families leaving the community center celebration. Hand in hand, they walked the familiar path back to a childhood home, where warm light spilled from every window. Inside, the modest kitchen buzzed with activity as relatives and neighbors put finishing touches on a special supper to honor their renewed vows. The old wooden table, scratched and worn from decades of family meals, now held steaming dishes of comfort food. Miss Ruby, who had lived next door for 40 years, set down her famous sweet potato pie, while Aunt Marie arranged her cornbread in a basket lined with a checkered cloth. "Come sit," Miss Ruby urged, pulling out chairs for them both. "This table has seen you through so much, Michaela Brooks Grant." As they settled in, surrounded by the people who had known her longest, stories began to flow as naturally as the sweet tea being poured. Uncle James leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with pride. "I remember this one at 12 years old, taking apart her daddy's radio right here at this table," he said, tapping the wooden surface. Had all the pieces spread out like a puzzle. Her mama was fit to be tied, but sure enough, that radio worked better than new when she put it back together. Miss Ruby dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "And now look at her. Saving companies, building futures for our children. Girl, you always had that light in you. We saw it even when you couldn't." Michaela squeezed Gabriel's hand under the table as more voices joined in, each story threading together the tapestry of her journey. Her high school math teacher recalled her staying late after class to study. The neighbor who'd helped her father in the garage remembered her determination to learn every tool's purpose. After the meal, when hugs and blessings had been exchanged and the last guest had departed, Michaela felt drawn to the garage. The space that had once held her father's tools and dreams now hummed with new purpose as a training center. In the quiet of evening, she spread out the blueprints for the next phase of expansion across a workbench. Gabriel's footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as he joined her. "I got some interesting calls today," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "3 major corporations want to partner with your foundation. Not for publicity. They've seen what you've built here. They want to be part of it." Michaela traced her finger along the lines of the blueprint, imagining new classrooms filled with eager students, internship programs connecting talent with opportunity, partnerships that could multiply their impact far beyond Detroit. "It's amazing how things change," she murmured. "A year ago, they wouldn't even look me in the eye. Now they're asking to learn from us." Gabriel wrapped his arm around her shoulders as they locked up the center for the night. The streetlights cast gentle pools of light along their path home, and the evening air carried the last whispers of summer. Michaela felt a deep peace settle in her heart, not the giddy triumph of winning or the satisfaction of proving doubters wrong, but something far more profound. She had found her true calling, to transform the world that had once dismissed her, lifting others as she climbed, one young dreamer at a time. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.